Imagine you're a Gurkha soldier, 4 feet 11 inches tall, the smallest man in your battalion. A Japanese grenade lands in your trench. You grab it with your right hand to throw it back, but it explodes. Your right hand is gone, blown off at the wrist. Your right eye is destroyed. Shrapnel tears through your face and body. You're bleeding out. You should be dead. And then you look up. 200 Japanese soldiers are charging your position, screaming, bayonets fixed, coming to overrun your trench and kill everyone. Your 2 comrades are wounded. They can't fight. You're the only one left, with 1 hand, 1 eye, and your bolt-action rifle. What do you do? If you're Rifleman Lakhiman Gurung, you don't retreat. You don't surrender. You shout at the enemy, "Now come and fight a Gurkha." And for the next 4 hours, you fight, working your bolt-action rifle with 1 hand, killing 31 Japanese soldiers, holding your position against impossible odds until dawn breaks and the enemy retreats. This is the true story of Lakhiman Gurung, the smallest Gurkha who became the biggest hero, the man who lost his hand but never lost his courage, the soldier who proved that size doesn't matter when your heart is that of a lion. Stay with me, because what this 4 foot 11 inch warrior did will show you that true strength has nothing to do with height, that one person defending what's right can defeat an army, and that a Gurkha with 1 hand is more dangerous than most men with 2. Chapter 1. Born in the Mountains. December 30th, 1917. A small village in the Tanahu district of Nepal, high in the Himalayan foothills. A baby boy named Lakhiman Gurung was born into the Gurung ethnic group, one of Nepal's warrior peoples. The Gurungs have a long tradition of military service. For generations, Gurung men have served as soldiers, first in the armies of Nepalese kings, then, after the Anglo-Nepalese War of 1814 to 1816, in the British Indian Army as Gurkhas. The word Gurkha comes from the town of Gurkha in Nepal. After the British fought against Nepalese soldiers in 1814 and were impressed by their ferocity and courage, the British began recruiting Nepalese men into special regiments called Gurkha Rifles. These weren't just any soldiers. Gurkhas became legendary. Their motto, "Better to die than be a coward." Their weapon, the kukri, a curved Nepalese knife that every Gurkha carries. Their reputation, fearless warriors who never surrender, never retreat, never leave a comrade behind. Young Lakhiman Gurung grew up hearing stories of Gurkha heroes, men from his village who had served in the British Indian Army, who had fought in World War I, who had brought honor to their families and their people. Lakhiman wanted to be like them, to be a soldier, to be a Gurkha, to prove his courage. But there was a problem. Lakhiman was small, very small. Chapter 2. Too small to be a warrior. As Lakhiman grew, it became clear he wasn't going to be tall. By the time he reached adulthood, Lakhiman stood just 4 feet 11 inches tall. In Western measurements, that's 150 centimeters, barely 5 feet. In Nepal's mountains, where many men are short and stocky, this wasn't unusual, but for a soldier, for a warrior, it was a disadvantage. The British Indian Army had minimum height requirements for Gurkha recruits. Generally, they wanted men who were at least 5 feet 2 inches tall, strong, sturdy, capable of carrying heavy loads through difficult terrain. Lakhiman was 3 inches too short. But Lakhiman Gurung didn't accept no as an answer. He knew the British Army made exceptions, especially during wartime when they needed more soldiers. And in the late 1930s, war was coming. In 1940, Lakhiman applied to join the 8th Gurkha Rifles, one of the most prestigious regiments in the British Indian Army. The recruiters looked at this tiny man, 4 feet 11 inches, barely 100 pounds. They could have rejected him, but there was something about Lakhiman, a fire in his eyes, a determination, and Britain needed soldiers. Lakhiman Gurung was accepted into the 8th Gurkha Rifles. He became Rifleman 10135. He was going to war. Chapter 3. Training to be a Gurkha. Gurkha training was brutal, physically demanding, mentally challenging, designed to weed out the weak and forge the strong into elite warriors. Lakhiman struggled with some aspects. His short legs meant he had to work harder to keep up on marches. His small frame meant carrying the same load as larger men was proportionally more difficult. But Lakhiman had advantages too. He was quick, agile, tough, and he had the heart of a Gurkha, which meant he would die before he quit. Lakhiman learned to shoot the Lee Enfield rifle, the standard British infantry weapon, a bolt-action rifle, 5-round magazine, reliable, accurate. But it required both hands to operate efficiently. Load with one hand, work the bolt with the other, aim, fire, work the bolt again to eject the spent casing and chamber the next round. Lakhiman became proficient. Not the best shot in his unit, but good enough. More importantly, he learned the Gurkha warrior ethos, loyalty to your brothers, courage in the face of death. The kukri is only drawn if it will taste blood. By 1942, Lakhiman Gurung was a trained soldier, and the world was at war. Chapter 4. The Burma Campaign. World War II. The British Empire was fighting on multiple fronts: Europe, Africa, and Asia, where Japan had invaded British colonies and was advancing rapidly. In 1942, Japan conquered Burma, now Myanmar. This was a disaster for the Allies. Burma bordered India. If Japan invaded India, the entire British position in Asia would collapse. The British had to hold India, and to hold India, they had to fight in Burma, through jungles, through monsoons, through some of the worst terrain and conditions imaginable. The Japanese soldier was formidable, tough, disciplined, willing to die for the emperor. They fought with fanatical determination, often launching suicidal banzai charges when their positions were threatened. And they showed no mercy. Captured Allied soldiers were often tortured and executed. Wounded men were bayoneted where they lay. This wasn't a war with rules. This was survival. Lakhiman learned quickly. He learned to move silently through the jungle, to spot ambushes, to stay alert, to trust his Gurkha brothers with his life. And he learned that combat was terrifying, chaotic, nothing like training. But Lakhiman didn't panic. He did his job, followed orders, fought when necessary. By 1945, Lakhiman had been in Burma for 3 years. He'd seen combat. He'd survived. He'd become a veteran. But his greatest test was still ahead. Chapter 5. May 12, 1945, Taunda. May 12, 1945, the 8th Gurkha Rifles were holding a defensive position near Taunda in Burma. The war in Europe had just ended. Germany had surrendered on May 8th, but in Burma, the war continued. The Japanese were in retreat, but a retreating enemy is still dangerous, especially the Japanese, who would often fight to the last man rather than surrender. Lakhiman's unit was holding a forward position, a network of trenches, defensive positions. They were there to block any Japanese attempt to break through Allied lines. Intelligence reported Japanese forces in the area. Everyone was on alert. As night fell on May 12th, Lachiman took his position in a trench. With him were 2 other Gurkha riflemen. 3 men, 1 trench, responsible for covering a section of the defensive line. They waited. It was dark, quiet. The jungle was never truly silent. Insects, birds, but no human sounds, no enemy. Then, shortly after midnight, the attack began.
Chapter 6: 3 Grenades. The Japanese came silently, creeping through the darkness, professional, disciplined. They'd been fighting for years. They knew how to attack at night. The first sign of their presence was a grenade, hurled from the darkness into Lachiman's trench. Lachiman saw it, a dark shape, falling, landing in the trench among the 3 Gurkhas. There was no time to think, just react. Lachiman grabbed the grenade with his right hand. He threw it back toward the enemy. The grenade exploded in mid-air. Fragments zinged through the darkness, but away from the trench. The 3 Gurkhas were safe. Seconds later, another grenade landed in the trench. Again, Lachiman grabbed it. Again, he threw it back. Again, it exploded harmlessly away from his position. Then a third grenade landed in the trench. Lachiman grabbed it with his right hand. He cocked his arm back to throw, and the grenade exploded. Chapter 7: The Explosion. The blast was deafening, blinding, all-consuming. Lachiman's right hand simply ceased to exist. The grenade had detonated in his grip. His hand, wrist, and part of his forearm were blown off. Just gone. The explosion tore through the right side of his body. Shrapnel ripped through his face, destroying his right eye. More shrapnel tore through his right arm, shoulder, and torso. Lachiman was thrown against the side of the trench. Blood poured from his wounds. The pain was indescribable. His 2 comrades were also wounded by the blast, one seriously. They were incapacitated, unable to fight. And then, through the ringing in his ears, Lachiman heard it. Voices, shouting, in Japanese. He looked up through his remaining left eye, through the smoke and darkness, and he saw them. Japanese soldiers, dozens of them, maybe 100, maybe more, charging toward his position, bayonets fixed, screaming their battle cry. Lachiman realized the truth. The grenades hadn't been random. They were the opening move of a major attack. The Japanese were trying to break through the Allied lines, and Lachiman's position was directly in their path. His comrades couldn't fight. He was alone, with one hand, one eye, bleeding out, and the enemy was coming. Chapter 8: Come and Fight a Gurkha. Most men would have retreated, would have run, would have accepted death, but Lachiman Gurung wasn't most men. He was a Gurkha. And a Gurkha does not retreat. Lachiman grabbed his Lee-Enfield rifle with his left hand, his only hand now. He positioned himself in the trench, and he shouted at the Japanese soldiers in Gurkhali, his native language. "Come on, now come and fight a Gurkha." The Japanese came, and Lachiman started shooting. Working a bolt-action rifle with one hand is nearly impossible. You need one hand to hold and aim the rifle, the other hand to work the bolt, to eject the spent cartridge, to chamber the next round. But Lachiman had no choice. He had to make it work. He braced the rifle against the side of the trench. He fired. Then, using just his left hand, he worked the bolt. Awkward, slow, but functional. He aimed at another Japanese soldier, fired, worked the bolt again. Again, and again, and again. The Japanese kept coming, wave after wave. They couldn't believe this position wasn't overrun yet. They could see it was just one man, one tiny Gurkha. How was he still fighting? But Lachiman kept shooting. Every shot counted. He couldn't afford to miss. His limited mobility with one hand meant reloading was slow and difficult. But Lachiman had been shooting since training. He knew his rifle intimately, and even with one hand, even half blind, even bleeding to death, muscle memory and determination kept him fighting. Chapter 9: 4 Hours of Hell. The Japanese attacked in waves, dozens at a time, rushing the trench, trying to overrun the position, trying to bayonet this stubborn Gurkha who wouldn't die. Lachemann shot them, one by one, close range, sometimes only meters away. When they got too close for his rifle, Lachemann used grenades, one-handed. He'd pull the pin with his teeth, throw with his left hand. Crude, but effective. The Japanese tried different tactics, flanking maneuvers, suppressing fire, coordinated rushes. Nothing worked. The tiny Gurkha was immovable. Every Japanese soldier who got close died. Hours passed. The battle raged. Lachemann was exhausted. Blood loss was making him weak. His vision was blurring. The pain was beyond comprehension. But he kept fighting. Because his wounded comrades were behind him. Because his brothers in the other trenches were counting on him to hold this position. Because he was a Gurkha, and Gurkhas do not retreat. The Japanese commander must have been furious. Dozens of his men dead or wounded, unable to take a single trench defended by one man. But the Japanese kept attacking, because they had no choice. They needed to break through Allied lines, and this stubborn Gurkha was in their path. Finally, as dawn approached, the Japanese assault faltered. Too many casualties, too much time wasted. Daylight was coming which would expose them to Allied artillery and air support. The Japanese retreated, disappearing back into the jungle. Lachemann Gurung remained in his trench, alone, one-handed, half-blind, surrounded by dead Japanese soldiers. He had held, for 4 hours, against impossible odds, and he was still alive.
Imagine you're standing at a French army recruiting station in 1914. The officer looks you up and down, 5 feet 3 inches tall, scrawny, barely literate. He shakes his head. Too small, too weak, go home. You try again at another station. Same answer. You try a 3rd time, 4th time, 5th time. Rejected, rejected, rejected. 9 times, 9 different recruiting officers tell you the same thing. You're not fit to be a soldier. You're too simple-minded, an imbecile. But you refuse to give up. Finally, 2 years into the war, when France is desperate, they let you join. But only as a stretcher bearer, carrying wounded men, because they think you're too stupid to fight. Then something remarkable happens. You don't just carry the wounded. You capture enemy soldiers, 1 by 1, 10 by 10, dozens at a time. By the end of the war, you've captured 1,180 German soldiers, mostly by yourself. You've survived being wounded 9 times. You've become the most decorated French soldier of World War I. And on Bastille Day 1919, Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the supreme commander of Allied forces, personally selects you to lead the victory parade through Paris, in front of millions of people. He calls you le premier soldat de France, the first soldier of France. This is the true story of Albert Roche, the orphan nobody wanted, the man rejected 9 times, the imbecile who outsmarted the German army 1,180 times, the smallest soldier who became France's greatest hero. Stay with me, because what this overlooked, underestimated, supposedly simple-minded man accomplished will show you that intelligence isn't measured by tests or schooling, that being underestimated is the ultimate advantage, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones everyone dismisses. Chapter 1. Born into Nothing. March 5th. 1895. Réauville, a tiny village in the Drôme department of southeastern France, not far from the Alps, rural, poor, isolated. A baby boy named Albert Severin Roche was born into circumstances that promised nothing but hardship. His father was a poor farmer. His mother died when Albert was still very young. The exact circumstances aren't well documented because, frankly,
Nobody was paying attention to poor orphans in rural France in the 1890s. What we know is that Albert's father couldn't care for him. Maybe he was too poor. Maybe he remarried and the new wife didn't want another man's child. Maybe he simply abandoned Albert. Whatever the reason, young Albert became an orphan. He was placed in state care. Orphanages in rural France at the turn of the century weren't pleasant places. They were institutions designed to keep unwanted children alive and teach them enough skills to become laborers. That was it. Albert received minimal education. He learned to read, but barely. He could write his name in simple words, but complex sentences were beyond him. Mathematics? Forget it. History? Geography? These weren't considered necessary for a poor orphan who had spent his life doing manual labor. By the time Albert was in his teens, he was working. Farm work, construction, whatever needed doing. Hard physical labor for little pay. And people treated Albert as simple. They didn't use kind words. They called him slow, stupid, dim-witted, an imbecile. Albert didn't have the vocabulary to argue. He didn't have the education to prove them wrong. So he just worked, and he listened, and he learned things that books don't teach. By 1914, Albert Roche was 19 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, maybe 120 pounds, barely literate, working as a day laborer. Nobody special, nobody important. Then on August 3rd, 1914, Germany declared war on France. World War I had begun. And Albert Roche decided he wanted to be a soldier. Chapter 2. Rejected 9 times. August 1914, across France, young men were flooding into recruiting stations. Patriotic fervor. Défendre la patrie. France needed soldiers, millions of them. Albert walked into a recruiting station. The officer looked at him. Name? Albert Roche. Age? 19. The officer looked Albert up and down. This tiny, scrawny young man. He checked Albert's height, 5 feet 3 inches. The French army preferred soldiers at least 5 feet 5 inches tall. Too small. Next. Albert was crushed. But he tried again at another station. Different officer. Same answer. You try a 3rd time, 4th time, 5th time. Rejected. 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 9 times. 9 different recruiting officers tell you the same thing. You're not fit to be a soldier. You're too simple-minded. An imbecile. But Albert refused to give up. Finally, 2 years into the war, when France is desperate, they let you join. But only as a stretcher-bearer. Brancardier. You understand? You carry wounded men from the battlefield. That's all. Albert nodded eagerly. He didn't care what job they gave him. He was in. He was going to be a soldier. On November 13th, 1916, Albert Roche was officially enlisted in the French army. He was assigned to the 27th Battalion of Chasseurs Alpins, the Alpine Hunters, elite mountain troops, some of the finest soldiers in the French army. And Albert, the reject, the imbecile, was going to be their stretcher-bearer. The Chasseurs Alpins were skeptical. They looked at this tiny, simple man. Great, we get the village idiot as our medic. But they needed stretcher-bearers. It was a dangerous, brutal job. Stretcher-bearers had to go into no man's land under fire to retrieve wounded soldiers. Many stretcher-bearers died doing this job. So the Chasseurs Alpins gave Albert his assignment, and they didn't expect much from him. Albert was about to surprise everyone.